Welcome, monstrous mavens of the macabre. Tonight, we're going to talk all about evil with the writer and director, Joshua Grannell, though you may know him better as the legendary Peaches Christ. The two of us had a delightfully dreadful discussion about his cult classic film, now returning to the public's bloodshot eye this month, though I must warn you, the two of us did disguise ourselves as normal people for our little tete-a-tete. I suppose you could say we wanted to be 6 feet under the radar. Please welcome Joshua Grannell. What inspired this Grand Guignol slasher film that's even more than that? Like, anything I describe is almost reductive of what the effect of this movie is.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. It was inspired. It's a lot of things, because I wanted to make a feature film. I was a filmmaker who'd been making short films. I was performing as Peaches Christ. I was hosting a midnight movie series, and I was basically building this whole career. Maybe without me even realizing it at the time, but this career around making movies, celebrating movies, performing movies. And I was working in a movie house where we were doing midnight mass. I was the manager. And so I just had all this sort of anxiety around the fact that movie theaters in San Francisco were closing left and right. Just so many movie theaters were closing. And so that's kind of what inspired the anxiety around the movie, which is, what length should we go to in order to save these movie houses? And I came up with this character that it's so bizarre. It doesn't really make sense. It's a total fantasy that she'd be making, grindhouse style exploitation gore films, in present day. But really, I was taken by the story of Doris Wishman, and I just love Doris Wishman. I love her movies, of course, her Chesty Morgan movies and Bad Girls Go to Hell and Let Me Die a Woman and all that stuff. But what I really love is she's a filmmaker who said, why should all these men get to make these movies? They're exploiting women. Well, I can exploit women too. Like women should be making money off this shit, not just men. And so she was really this big inspiration for the character of Deborah.
Which I go when I ask that, like, why Deborah? That is probably my favorite running gag, is that she has the most pretentious pronunciation of her name possible, because it's Deb Tennis and then Deborah Tenise. So, and that carries over from Grindhouse, your short, inspired. So why did you do that? That's hilarious.
That's a really good question. It's something that I actually hadn't thought for a while. But so this is sort of a strange thing, and probably the lawyers who asked about this wouldn't be too pleased to know that Deb Tennis was this person that's a real name from someone. It's such a convoluted story, but basically a college roommate told me about this woman who was notorious in the small town he grew up in, and her name was Deb Tennis. And she has nothing to do with all that evil at all, other than the fact that I thought the name was funny, Deb Tennis. And they always used to talk about Debbie Tennis. And so I just took the name, and then, I was amused, obviously, being a drag queen. I love language. I love manipulating words and slang, and just thought, like, well, she in her mind needs to be fancy and pretentious. And so she's going to change the pronunciation of her name to this ridiculous thing. That was all it was.
Okay. But it made me laugh every time she said it or corrected someone in it. And so this movie, it was released. It's you said it was on Chiller, which maybe people watching this might not even remember that channel. A brief, but it's really kind of been missing from consciousness, public consciousness, if you will, for 10 years. So this is really this a great chance to get it back out to a wide audience. What's interesting about it as a cult film is it still feels absolutely fresh. It could be released today. Some of the satire would be probably, and as you said in one of the commentary notes, it's almost too vicious. in some things because of what has changed. But why do you think this movie is still fresh as 2022, even though released in 2010?
Yeah, that's another thing that I'm really grateful for, because I hadn't actually seen it in a while. And sitting down to rewatch it after some years, I was a little nervous, kind of like, well, is this still going to, like, work? But I think because my influences are older, and I wanted the film, especially The Evil Family and the movie theater, to almost appear vintage or classic in this sort of contemporary way. That all works. And even the teenagers, the way they're costumed and stuff, I think the costumer did a really good job of their clothes are pretty neutral. And the one thing that really dates it are the cell phones. That's where you really notice,
I listen to that commentary.
Yeah.
That is so funny that is the thing. Or at the
Yeah.
razor, is that, like, I'd forgotten that one existed.
Exactly.
But and they're so crucial, which is, I think that's part of it too, is, even though the style of communication with them has perhaps changed, it's ubiquitous throughout this film. It's it's interesting there.
And
That
was new when I was writing it. That's the other thing. That's how old the movie is at this point, because I wrote the movie, and cell phones now are the screenwriter's conundrum. If you're a horror screenwriter, the biggest question you need to answer is, what are we doing with the cell phones? Do they have the cell phones, or do they not? Because now cell phones are just an extension of who we all are. So, if you're in a horror movie and you need to call for help and you have a cell phone, it totally changes the game,
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it. I love watching, like, oh, well, I mean, I watched Ty West's X. I was late to the game. And I was like, oh, that's really smart. Like, set the movie before there were cell phones.
Yeah, I was thinking they all have to be period pieces now.
Yes.
In order to keep the suspense.
And there was some other movie I saw recently where, like, some reason the cell phones were all scrambled or something. I forget, but it was like, okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, or a worldwide disaster where the satellites were shot down. That's got to be it.
Yeah.
If you were making this today, because I said there was one scene, and I can call it out. I mean, because it almost works better to make the character who does it even more reprehensible. Is the violence against an Asian dowager in one scene. And I did actually, the first time I saw it, but oh, that plays differently today. And then your commentary says exactly the same thing. What else would you do differently if you were making it today?
Yeah, I mean, and that interesting thing where, like, so the scene is one of the characters who's awful. He's an awful character and supposed to be doing hideous things. Is seen stealing from an older Asian woman in San Francisco, and he beats her, and it's violent and it's awful. In the script, she was written as a little old rich lady walking on the street. She wasn't called out as Asian at all. And so when you're casting in San Francisco and you're looking for older actors, of course there's going to be a diversity of actors who come in. So it just wasn't ever something where the fact that she was Asian was even playing into my decision to cast her. And sadly, since then, and because of whatever, racism obviously, but a lot of that inspired by COVID and other things, we've had incidents of violence against Asian people in San Francisco, specifically a few older Asian women. So there's those things that, like, over time, if you look at the movie Heathers now, it plays so differently than it did when it came out. We didn't have school violence, the way that we have shootings now, watching a movie like Heathers, when that came out, it was a fantasy. It was a dark fantasy. There was nothing like that happening. And so it really changes these sort of real life events. They change the way that you see the movie. So that's it. That's one thing I would probably change. Yeah. I mean, are you asking what other things I would change?
Well, is there anything else? I mean,
I will say that I would probably put myself in the movie less as Peaches. That's one thing that I struggle with is like, it was hard. I just remember how hard it was, when I was in drag those days. And yeah, like that was frustrating. I didn't enjoy it. I admire like Charles Busch and people who can, be John Cameron Mitchell. I mean, directed Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and he's in drag in every shot, like through the whole movie. So I know that for me that was maybe more than I wanted to do. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of other things. I don't know. I think I would add more gore, honestly, if I could. There were things that were cut from the movie that I wish weren't cut.
There is a scene you reference in a couple of different extras, and I went, no, but I if I can counter, it's almost funnier that I have to imagine what
Right,
had
right,
happened
right.
in the
Yeah.
library. It's so I
Yes.
appreciate that. A
Yes.
little restraint in a film,
Yes.
not much, but
I don't know that word. Actually, though, I will say I kind of do know that word. And believe it or not, All About Evil is very restrained compared to most of my stuff. So, funnily enough, All About Evil might be one of the most restrained things because a lot of stuff is centered in a more, like I do an immersive haunted attraction here in San Francisco, and it is just, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just insane. It's so over the top, but that's part of its style. And All About Evil, I actually tried to walk a line, a line between absurd and realistic, a lot more than I'm used to.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of obvious influence. You mentioned that the classic film style, and it's both horror and not. And one thing that I know I'm like beginning my review with is how you've crossed the Wizard of Oz with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane as a prologue into something completely itself. Like you have to know Baby Jane to recognize that there are the shots, but it is still completely original. I want to absolutely, impress upon that. But if someone who, say, like me, gets a little obsessive about film history too, is where would you suggest someone start to watch your influences? Because there's so many
Oh
references to
gosh.
this.
I mean, the one thing that came up during the pandemic when I had my entire calendar pulled from me and life came to a reaching halt, is that I, like every other performer who didn't already have one, created a podcast. And so if you are interested in knowing more about the movies that I love and what I'm obsessed with, my co-host Michael Verratti and I have a podcast called Midnight Mass, and we do kind of like fun celebrations on our favorite things, but it's very nerdy. It's very, we usually have 2 guests. I mean, the episodes are way too long, some of them are like almost 2 hours long, but if you're really interested in the kind of movies I love, I would recommend checking out Midnight Mass. And certainly, I mean, the influence of some things, I think the Holy Triumvirate, maybe there's 4, maybe the 4, but discovering John Waters as a young Marylander, growing up in Maryland, life-changing, totally changed my life. Of course, that comes with Divine and Mink Stole. Discovering the Rocky Horror Picture Show, life-changing. My relationship to drag actually is all through cult movies. It's Divine and Frankenfurter and Elvira, and also being a fan of Elvira. And then maybe the 4th to round it out would be Freddy Krueger. I was really, really obsessed with The Nightmare on Elm Street. I love Freddy Krueger. And so, those 4 things are like the main obsessions. But you're right. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I mean, even I watch movies now on Shudder or whatever that I haven't seen since I was a kid. And I'll go, oh my God, that's where I got that thing, in either All About Evil or another show or another movie.
Okay.
Sometimes I don't even know I'm creating an homage. It's just in your brain,
And it's exciting though when they still hold up. Like I just
Yeah,
watched
yeah,
Baby
yeah.
Jane maybe 3 months ago
Oh,
and went, "Oh, it still works. Oh, it's fantastic."
it's better than ever. It's such a great movie. And thank God, for all of his, I think, misses, and he has both hits and misses. Ryan Murphy is obviously like, a very prolific creator. One of the favorite things for me is Feud. And so if
Mhm.
you haven't seen Feud, it is fabulously well done. It's a great series to watch with Baby Jane. And God, Baby Jane is just, it really, people describe it as sort of a bad movie, but the fact of the matter is it's not a bad movie at all. It's a great movie.
No, it's good. I
Yeah.
made my wife watch it, and
Yeah.
I watched in fear, like, oh, you're gonna think this is stupid. She's like, no, that was good. Oh my God, that
Yeah.
was good. You know, and it
Yeah.
is. It's fantastic. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about this. You know, the inspiration there with the single screen movie house. Because I actually just hosted a screening up at the Roxy a few
Ah,
weeks ago, and so
okay.
which sadly, you know, was the first time I'd been in there, and
Ah.
you know, to my shame. Uh, but what is it about those places that holds such magic?
Well, I mean, obviously, I have a really strong connection to them personally because I worked in them. I'm a projectionist. I was lucky enough to like go to film school when we were still shooting on film, and then I moved to San Francisco, and I was trained by these crusty, grumpy old, union projectionists in the booth, and I just have a totally romantic connection with cinemas and movie theaters, and especially single screen old movie theaters. And I said this the other day, which is really kind of sad. But before the pandemic, and when I made All About Evil, the anxiety was centered around losing old movie theaters, losing neighborhood single screen theaters, which just weren't profitable because a multiplex obviously brings in more money and is a smarter business plan. And we were losing a lot of them. But now I just think it's so strange that we live in a time where we're fighting for all movie theaters, the multiplexes. I mean, any of them. Like, there's this sort of question as to whether or not film is going to survive. With a cinematic form, and will, of course. But yeah, I mean, just the fact that all those hedge funds, tried to bankrupt, AMC, it's like, wow, like, we're really living in a real weird time. And yeah, I love going to the movies. I love it. So, it's not, I mean, God, so much of my work is centered around cinemas.
Yeah, but also kind of the live roadshow thing, that
Yeah.
certainly you referenced you did a William Castle style show, which I'd like a time machine right now to go back and see that, and and I know you're kind of returning. You've still got a screening of this in Portland, so I assume something will happen there, and you are doing a
Well,
show in August. Go ahead.
I was going to say the cool thing about Portland is that is a whole group of drag performers led by Carla Rossi, who's a drag performer in Portland, who was inspired by my show Midnight Mass. And years ago, she created a show at the Hollywood Theater called Queer Horror, where she does a pre-show like I used to do, and then screens movies. So I'm really, really excited because I get to be, her guest in
Oh,
Portland. And
cool.
she and her team are gonna put on a show. And I'm really, really excited. I mean, I'll be there as Peaches and everything, but the show is all up to them. I'm a guest on her stage, which I'm really looking forward to. And I'm also really excited because I'm bringing a very special date. But it's going to be a surprise. But yeah, anyone who, well, whatever, it's going to be, she'll be very excited when I show up with this person.
That's great. I mean, and it's interesting. You're passing along kind of this legacy, which was passed on to you by people like, this film does have Cassandra Peterson, so Elvira was obviously you mentioned as a big influence. Now you're getting to pass along. Has Trixie Mattel reached out and thanked you for the roadshow appearance that
No.
you? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let this be the. I'm calling her out. Not that I have any belief she'll see this, but still, I found that fascinating. It's like you never
Yeah.
know who you're going to
Well,
affect.
she and I do text pretty regularly. She's
Okay.
obviously hugely famous now. Her star has ascended. I did have to get permission from her in order for her photo to be included in the booklet. So for those of you who don't know, in Milwaukee, it was when we went. I met a young Trixie Mattel who was part of the All About Evil show. She was 18 years old. She was a member of the Rocky Horror cast at the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee. And so she was one of the monsters in my opening number. And I think Michael writes in the booklet that I say something on stage like, this is the only drag queen I need in Milwaukee, because no one else was really doing drag, but this person clearly knew what they were doing. And yeah, she had me and Mink Stoll sign her foam head. And she told me that later. I didn't remember it. And then I guess I told her that she needed to wear more makeup. So if you see the photo, you'll see that Trixie is wearing very, very little makeup compared to what you would know as Trixie is, her iconic makeup today. And Trixie and I, we were roommates a few years ago in Provincetown. We've, stayed friends, and she's been in a bunch of my shows. So I love her.
Okay, I'm starting a false beef then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not really. She's actually been very, very lovely. And, yeah, I'm kind of, for a bunch of the younger queens, I'm sort of now in this maternal position of someone they reach out to. It's funny. She's just, I could not be happier for her. I can't believe, not that she doesn't deserve it, but the level at which drag has exploded. Yeah. And the amount of, phenomenal success she's been able to achieve. And I only say I can't believe it just because, I can't believe it. It's nothing to do with her. It's just that we've been so in the shadows for so long,
Yeah, is there we call this a cult film. You came out of what we call an underground scene. In 2022, is there an underground anymore? Like, has everything become?
It's interesting in a sense. I was on the news this morning locally, and they were asking me about a gig I have and that I perform at the Symphony Hall, and I was saying, yeah, it's so strange that like Peaches Christ, who at one time even in San Francisco was considered kind of offensive or at least edgy, and I would never have been booked at someplace like the Symphony Hall. And now I'm regularly performing in not just this Symphony Hall, but I have a manager out of London who books symphony halls. And I'm kind of like, I said to the newscaster, I'm like, I think I just need to do something really offensive, soon, because, I'm really losing my cred. But then again, I don't know that, I don't know that it works quite the same way. The culture has changed. Yeah, we've evolved. Horror is now normal. Horror is everywhere. Horror is so popular. It's more popular than it's ever been in the history of cinema. And, all this stuff, I never would have seen it coming, because when I was into all this stuff 20, 30, 40 years ago, even as a kid, it wasn't popular. This was the unpopular stuff. So, yeah, times changed.
It had
so I don't know if there's an underground. Maybe the underground is like, I don't know.
One of us.
I don't know what
one of us. Is. We get to chant it to everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are a lot of great people in the film, and is there anyone that I'd say a lot of this cast have clearly become like family? I wish again that I'd seen the movie before I went to the signing at Dark Delicacies. I have to call them out, Dark Delicacies, because I didn't know how much I was going to love everybody that was there. And I'm like, oh, she was great. I wish I'd been able to say that. Like, I knew she was great. And Thomas, good Lord, so it's, is there anybody that you admired at the time that you really wish you'd been able to find a place for?
Oh, that's a good question. That I had hoped could be in the movie and it didn't work out, that kind of thing. Yeah, there were people, but honestly, I think it's hard when you're casting and making a movie. You obviously should do whatever is best for the movie. I'll tell you that I was God at one point, and I forget why it didn't work out. I actually think she went and worked on a Ty West movie, but at one point, Mary Warnov was going to be in the movie and play the high school teacher.
Oh yeah. she would have been
You know,
great.
and she's
But
Principal Togar, right? Like, so that would have been iconic. You know, it's like, oh my God, we have Principal Togar as the English teacher. You know, but I love the woman that we got. She was fantastic. Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's hard to say now because looking at the cast, like Jack Donner, who plays Mr. Twigs, I did
so
not
good.
know. Yeah, I did not know him before the movie. And you know, as you've seen because you watched the featurette, you know, they actually include some of the audition clips of them coming in and doing their
Yeah.
auditions. And Mr. Twigs, for whatever reason, I was obsessed with who was going to do that. Like, I felt like Deborah and Mr. Twigs were going to color this movie. Like that was just so important to me. They were like the horror faces that I need. I just, and everyone of the producers were very obsessed with Deborah, who's going to play Deborah, who's going to play Horse, which makes sense. But I really had this thing about Mr. Twigs has got to be right, and if it's not right, it just won't work. And I saw so many different Mr. Twigs, you know, people. And of course, if I could like turn back time and have cast Vincent Price or, you know, a ton of these sort of classic horror actors, you know, of course.
Yeah, that's a totally different podcast
Yeah.
where you recast it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was when Jack walked in, and now I guess my point is now, oh my God, I can't even imagine anybody but Jack Donner, you know, playing that part.
Yeah, he fits what you said. Like it's almost a comedic Angus Scrim, which there
Yes.
is another reference, Phantasm, and I got it. Like he walked on and I went, oh my God, it's the tall man.
Well, did I say that in one of the
You
commentaries?
did.
Yes,
Did
yes.
say it in one of the commentaries.
Yes, that was the person who, in my mind, you know, we would offer it to Angus Scrim, and you know, that was who I thought could play the part. Yeah,
yeah. No, it worked, and as I said, you know, they're a family, and I feel like you had assembled one of the best repertory companies you possibly could have. So I have to end this by asking you, do you have another film in you? Because you put the camp aside, you put the over the top. I gotta say, this movie is really well directed. So
oh, thank you.
I finished it and I wanted to say, you know, where are the next Joshua Grannell films? And I'll find the short, sure, but where's the next feature?
Well, I hope it's coming. And, you know, I will be honest and say that All About Evil, making that movie was a life dream come true. And I still had some other things that I wanted to do. And since All About Evil, I've been able to achieve some of those other dreams. You know, I was able to go and tour the world as Peaches and go, you know, really get out there and do a bunch of stage shows and write and direct a lot of theater, as well as create and run an immersive haunted attraction. I mean, those are really the things that, like, as a kid, I wanted to do these things. And so I'm now ready. I said to actually one of the producers and one of the investors of All About Evil the other day, when I was basically asking for more money for a new movie, I said, I'm ready. I really want to start just making movies and not just another movie, but like movies. This is, you know, I'm like, I love performing live. I love it. And I love touring, but I'm getting older, and I actually, believe it or not, am ready to like settle down a little bit more. And for me, that's so crazy to say, but settling down means making movies, I guess. I don't know. Which is crazy.
And
but,
you could still do the road shows, because I just saw Lloyd Kaufman is down here doing Shakespeare Shit Show and touring with that, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and
good.
Lloyd Kaufman, oh my God, I would love to put Lloyd in a movie. He's an inspiration. I mean, he's a huge inspiration to me. And yeah, I mean, so anyways, the new movie, well, there's a couple that are in the works. Michael Varady and I actually wrote a script together during the pandemic. But next movie, I think, is the movie people, my guess is, based on feedback I've gotten, this is the one they kind of hoped I would make, even way back then. And so, yeah, I'll just say that it's got drag queens and it's got gore and it's over the top.
Okay.
No, it is insane. Yeah.
Is it the Diary of Anne Frankenstein? because that may be my favorite of your parody titles. But anyway,
Yeah, no,
that
it's not that. I don't know if I could get away with that. Although, didn't someone do that? Like, it was in another movie recently where someone told me they were like, "Oh, did you see this movie? They do the Diary of Anne Frankenstein." I'm like, "Of course they
oh.
do." You know?
You know,
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm catching up. You know, the
yeah, yeah,
pandemic's
yeah.
allowed me to go, oh, a Shutter subscription. What a great idea. You know?
I have to
So,
say, I mean, between Severin, who put out the Blu-ray, and Shudder, who I am like, I don't want to trash Chiller, but we were on Chiller before, and I was never that excited about being on Chiller because the programming just didn't excite me. But
no,
I have
it
to
was
say,
hard to find. It was
yeah,
hard to find also.
and they were, it
Yeah.
was very basic, and and it also wasn't streaming, so you didn't have, you had to kind of tune into stuff, and but
Yeah.
Shudder, ooh, I'm a huge fan. I love it. And Shudder's been very, I feel like I'm at home on Shudder. I'm on their Behind the Monsters series, and I'm on the Dragula TV show, and now All About Evil's there, and I'm in a couple documentaries like Scream Queen that are on Shudder. So Shudder is, I just love it, and I love that I'm part of it.
I think that's a great note to end on. Josh, thanks for
Thank
taking
you.
the time. I mean, I think this is longer than I had told the publicist I was going to take, but I
My
can't stop
pleasure.
talking. So,
Yeah, my
all right.
pleasure.
Once again, All About Evil is from severinfilms.com online, Blu-ray, and now streaming on Shutter. And then whatever the next film is, and I said I'm very excited. I hope that we'll get a chance to talk again. So thank you very much.
Sounds good. All right, take care.
Thank you for watching. Please be sure to creepily caress the subscribe button to be sure you don't miss out on any ghoulish gifts from the Fanboy Planet crypt. And who knows? I may one day find my way back out of the catacombs and into dim light again.